Hello friends, welcome back my YouTube channel. If you want to watch the super hit movie Jungle in full HD, then first of all, give this video a like, and if you are visiting our channel for the first time, then subscribe to this channel. The name of the movie we are going to discuss in today's video is Jungle. So we will give you information about how and where you will get to watch Jungle film officially. Apart from this, we will give you a detailed look at the pre-production, post-production, budget, box office collection, and filming of this movie. A detailed review of the movie will also be given in this video, where we will explain the story of this movie in detail. We will also discuss the cast and casting performance of the movie. Apart from this, information about the music department and technical department will also be given. Because of this video is going to be very interesting and entertaining. So you must watch this video till the end. And if you haven't liked this video yet, then like this video now and subscribe to this channel. So, let's start the video. Jungle is a 2017 biographical survival drama film based on the true story of Israeli adventurer Yossi Ginsberg's 1981 journey into the Amazon rainforest. Directed by McLean and written by Justin Monjo, the film stars Daniel Radcliffe as Ginsberg, with Alex Russell, Thomas Kretschmann, Yasmin Kassim, Joel Jackson, and Jacek Koman in supporting roles. It was filmed in Mount Tamborine on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. Plot: in the early 1980s, an Israeli adventurer named Yossi Ginsberg travels to Bolivia, planning to journey into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. There, he meets Marcus Stam, a Swiss schoolteacher, and Stam's friend Kevin Gale, an American hiker and avid photographer. The three are staying in La Paz at an Israeli community hostel. Yossi is out in the market one day, where a stranger asks if he is an American. Yossi replies, no. During conversation, the Austrian stranger, Karl Ruprechter, claims the existence of an indigenous tribe in the jungle that they should go see. Karl says he knows the jungle, and he is friends with the tribe. Yossi, excited about the prospect of exploring the uncharted jungle and meeting undiscovered peoples like the Toromonas, chooses to believe him. He heads back to the apartment to convince Marcus and Kevin to come along. Skeptical of the stranger and his story, they refuse. Yossi continues to press them until they ultimately acquiesce. The next day, the trio meets Karl in a shop while he is gathering supplies for the hike. All three men are surprised when Karl leaves with the supplies and tells them they will pay for everything. Yossi, Marcus, Kevin, and Karl hike through the jungle for several days. They make it to a village called Azrimas, where it is apparent Karl knows the villagers. They spend the day in the village and stay overnight, then head back into the jungle the next morning. Marcus starts having trouble walking and discovers his feet are full of bloody sores. By now, Kevin and Yossi are tired of Marcus's complaining. Yossi, Kevin, and Karl discuss how they all should proceed. Karl wants to leave the three while he goes to get help, but Kevin and Yossi disagree with that plan. At this point, Marcus walks up, and Kevin proposes building a raft to navigate downriver so all of them can stay together. This differs from Ginsberg's actual account, where the four return all the way to Azriamas before deciding to make the raft with the help of the villagers. They build the raft and set off down the river. They hit some rapids, barely making it through. Karl gets upset at Kevin for taking control on the raft, floats the raft to shore, and says he is going hunting. Kevin had noticed Karl's fear of water and deduces that Karl cannot swim. Yossi then goes to find Karl, so he will not abandon them. Marcus and Karl decide to abandon the journey and make the 3-day hike back to civilization, where they can then return to La Paz. Meanwhile, Yossi and Kevin continue their journey downriver until their makeshift raft is hung up on a rock in the middle of the rapids. Kevin decides to swim for shore and instructs Yossi to throw him the machete so he can cut vines and pull him to safety, but the raft is instead destroyed in the rapids. Yossi is washed away by the river, leaving Kevin behind. Without a knife, tools, or any kind of survival training, Yossi must improvise shelter and forage to survive. He begins to give up hope after losing all sense of direction, wondering if he will survive the jungle. He is alone for at least 2 weeks. during which time he has several hallucinations regarding his past and finding a local woman. Meanwhile, Kevin is rescued by people from a nearby town who take him to Ruenebaque, 120 miles, 190 kilometers from Yossi's location, Cura Playa. At Ruenebaque, Kevin calls for the help of the local authorities to find Yossi. They fail to find Yossi via plane flyover, but Kevin believes that Yossi is alive. Kevin ropes in the help of the local boat pilot to search for Yossi, finally discovers his weakened friend, and takes him to Ruenebaque. The epilogue reveals that Carl lied about the hidden tribes, was known to rope backpackers into dangerous treks, and was wanted by the authorities. He and Marcus never returned to La Paz and were never seen again. The film was dedicated to Marcus' memory. Cast: Daniel Radcliffe as Yossi Ginsburg, Alex Russell as Kevin Gale, Thomas Kretschmann as Carl Ruprechter, Yasmin Kasim as Kina, Joel Jackson as Marcus Stam, Yak Koman as Moni Ginsburg production. On the 10th of February 2016, Daniel Radcliffe joined the cast. On the 21st of March 2016, Thomas Kretschmann and Alex Russell also joined the cast. Principal photography began on the 19th of March 2016 and ended on the 13th of April 2016. Release: the film premiered at the Melbourne International Film Festival on the 3rd of August 2017. It was released in Australia on the 9th of November 2017 by Umbrella Entertainment. Reception: the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes gives the film a rating of 62%, based on 55 reviews, with an average rating of 5.8/10. The website's critics' consensus reads, Daniel Radcliffe does right by Jungle's fact-based story with a clearly committed performance, even if the film around him doesn't always match his efforts. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 48 out of 100, based on 14 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. Writing for the AV Club, Alex McLevy gave the film a B, praising Radcliffe's acting commitment and the shock of some of the scenes, but wrote, "Unfortunately, the movie too often can't resist leaning into the melodrama of the situation. Rather than allowing the power to come from the raw intensity of what transpired, it occasionally turns Ginsburg's journey into a Hollywood spectacle, making the incredible seem a little less so in the process." Dread Central's Jonathan Barkin gave the film 4.5 out of 5, saying that it was, without a doubt, the most thrilling, exhilarating, and inspiring film I've seen this year. Accolade: Stefan Duccio was nominated for Best Cinematography at the 7th Awards. Jungle Review: the last time Daniel Radcliffe was lost in the wilderness, he had a magical erection that doubled as a compass and a case of flatulence so extreme he became a fart-powered human jet ski. Also, he was dead. This was last year's notorious black comedy Swiss Army Man, aka the Farting Corpse movie, aka the artist formerly known as Harry Potter, is getting older and weirder and more indie. Going into Radcliffe's new film, the survival drama Jungle, from Wolf Creek director Greg McLean, I wondered whether it could possibly be interpreted as a prequel, detailing events leading up to the metamorphosis of Radcliffe from fledgling Hogwarts student to gaseous art film carcass. Admittedly, it seemed unlikely the story would end with the protagonist dying, given it was adapted from a best-selling memoir written by that same person, Yossi Ginsburg. Set in the early 1980s, Radcliffe plays Ginsburg, an Israeli backpacker, and now Byron Bay-based entrepreneur. Australian actors Alex Russell and Joel Jackson play his buddies Kevin and Marcus, an American photographer and Swiss teacher respectively. German actor Thomas Kretschmann is Carl, a mysterious Austrian. Mysterious is also a good word to describe the rather jumbled ethnicities of the casting couch. In La Paz, Bolivia, Yossi meets Carl, who claims to be a geologist. He is entranced by Carl's romantic stories of the jungle, of uncharted, awe-inspiring wilderness, gold, and even a lost tribe of indigenous people. This fantastic spiel reminded me of Errol Flynn's autobiography My Wicked, Wicked Ways, replete with sensationally implausible anecdotes about a Tarzan-like youth in New Guinea, which is to say, tales of the tall kind. Yossi is sold hook, line, and sinker, however, and agrees to join an expedition. After some arm twisting, so do Kevin and Marcus. Soon, after a picturesque flight in a small aircraft over snow-tipped mountains, they are off the map and against the elements. Alpha male Carl is still in sell the sizzle mode, spruiking their surroundings as the last frontier on Earth, and ranting about how the jungle shows us what we really are. We are nothing, a joke. The others, understandably, start questioning their choice of company. In McLean's hands, Ginsberg's story feels less like nonfiction than Ozploitation goes tropical. His direction treads a time-worn, genrefied path, hemming and hawing through fake-out scares and jabbing crescendos. An expectation is set that the lush scenery will become scaffolding for carnage, and the film's ultimate impact will come down to what happens when the shit hits the fan. Everything before then is procrastination, and by George, there's a lot of it. McLean taking almost an entire hour to get to the nub of the story. Clunky dialogue from screenwriter Justin Monjo, who co-wrote The Wonderful Spear, eventually bottoms out, with gooey lines about following one's heart and not giving up. After framing the story with a relatively even four-way spread between the principal characters, Monjo's script dramatically contracts, jettisoning a certain person, or people, from the experience. To explain any further is to teeter on the precipice of spoilerland. Suffice to say, while this approach may have worked in a memoir, it throws the film's structure out of whack. The change in emphasis unwittingly confers the rather dubious suggestion that one life is more valuable, and one person's story more worthy of being told than another. Jungle looks pretty. The cinematographer Stefan Duccio, who recently shot Backtrack and Barracuda, given a feast of exotic eye candy to frame, filming in Colombia and on Queensland's Mount Tamborine. But the natural beauty of the settings are tempered by McLean's pulpy approach, which has the labored grunt of a cut-and-run midnight movie. None of the cast wrestle much impact from the material. Even and especially Radcliffe, who is sent through the ringer in various terrible ways. Before you know it, he's battling intense hallucinations and pulling worms out of his forehead. Jungle is perhaps best appreciated as a paean to the will to survive, although that message, like much of the film, feels contrived. Even events that transpired in real life, such as the group's decision to split up, come across as algorithmic. As its limitations as a drama became obvious, I wanted more and more for the film to be simply more entertaining, and wondered whether the addition of a farting corpse or a magical boner might have improved it. In 1981, Yossi Ginsberg, all of 21 years old, traveled to South America with dreams of adventure. He ended up in La Paz, Bolivia, where he befriended Marcus Stam, a Swiss teacher, and Kevin Gale, an American photographer. Together, they set out on an expedition into the uncharted Amazon, led by the mysterious Karl Ruprechter, an Austrian man who claimed to have knowledge of hidden gold. After traveling for several days with low supplies and frayed nerves, the four men separated. Karl and Marcus would walk, while Yossi and Kevin set out on the river in a raft. But as the raft neared a waterfall, Yossi and Kevin lost control and got separated from each other. Yossi spent 3 weeks stranded in the jungle with no supplies and little food before being rescued by a search mission just before they were about to abandon hope. Yossi's remarkable tale of bravery and fortitude feels ready-made for a film adaptation, one that delves into the psychological horrors he faced alone in the jungle, uncertain if he'd ever make it out alive. Director Greg McLean, best known for his debut horror film Wolf Creek, delivers on this promise with the gritty yet ultimately overwrought Jungle. Starring the always game Daniel Radcliffe as Yossi, Jungle succeeds in communicating the young Israeli kid's horrible situation, as well as the camaraderie between him and his new friends, but falls short when trying to visually explicate his mental state. For most of the film, McLean coasts on the real-life details of Yossi's story to great effect. He and Radcliffe wonderfully capture Yossi's open yet reckless mindset as he lands in La Paz and meets Marcus, played by Joel Jackson, and Kevin, Alex Russell, who conveys just the right amount of American arrogance. McLean strikes the right tone during Yossi and the crew's first few days out in the jungle, hovering somewhere between dangerous and exciting. He's also perceptive about how the unstable environment creates a hierarchy amongst those who dare enter it. Yossi and Kevin adapt right away, but Marcus immediately feels out of place, and his blistered, cut-open feet are unable to keep up with his buddies. Marcus begins to lose it while Yossi and Kevin resent him for dragging them down. Ironically, Jungle starts to lose its way when Yossi loses his. As soon as McLean has only Radcliffe and the Jungle as his two main characters, he starts over-relying on cheap effects and hoary psychological cliches to express Yossi's fraught state of mind. Yossi certainly suffered from hallucinations and near-fatal exhaustion during his harrowing journey, but Jungle illustrates this with faux delirious imagery and wholly unnecessary flashbacks that exist only to break up the monotony of the action. There seems to be great trepidation on McLean's part to simply allow Radcliffe to communicate the character's own internalized emotions. Instead, he employs visual gimmickry as cheap support. It's a shame because Radcliffe carries Jungle on his shoulders, when McLean or Justin Monjo's script lets him. He admirably throws himself into this role and plays Yossi as a kid who got into an adventure that was way over his head. He excels at channeling Yossi's frustration with his own rudimentary exploration skills, like when he realizes he spent the day walking in a circle or when he can't get the rescue plane overhead to see his location. He stumbles occasionally when he has to monologue his own fears. His shaky Israeli accent is mostly to blame, but it's primarily a physical role, and luckily, he's up to the task. There's still great charge in watching the former Harry Potter as an emaciated wreck, crawling through the brush while screaming for help. Despite its many obvious flaws, shaky dialogue, unsubtle sound design, a strong tendency to visually explicate simple ideas, Yossi's story has enough weight on its own to render Jungle a moderately compelling survival flick. The film is on solid ground when it relies solely on the unique dangers of the Amazon, like in the film's best scene when Yossi finds a parasite lodged in his forehead and must use tweezers to extract it. Moreover, Yossi's straightforward plight makes him a strong protagonist and keeps the audience invested in his struggle to stay alive. Sometimes a compelling reality is all you need to make a good fiction. A survival expert gives a perfect score to an overlooked 2017 Daniel Radcliffe movie. He may be best known for bringing to life on screen the literary boy wizard Harry Potter, but Radcliffe's career has indeed ranged far beyond that one massive cinematic world. Radcliffe has notably challenged himself as an actor in the wake of his Potter success, starring in everything from the offbeat indie film Swiss Army Man to the crazed action comedy Guns Akimbo to the parody musical biopic Weird, the Al Yankovic Story, just to name a few. In addition to that eclectic rundown of films, Radcliffe in 2017 starred in a true-life survival movie called Jungle, which went largely overlooked by audiences at the time, but which contains some truly realistic depictions of survival scenarios, according to one expert. In a video piece for Insider, jungle survivalist Hazen Audle trains his eye on the Radcliffe-starring movie, praising it for its credible depiction of the dangers of whitewater rapids, and for its attention to detail regarding Amazon survival challenges like food gathering and dealing with dangerous animals, giving the movie a perfect 10 out of 10 score. With an overall score of 61% on Rotten Tomatoes, Jungle was only a lukewarm success with critics, but Radcliffe himself was singled out for praise in many reviews. Real Film Reviews called the actor's performance eye-opening and completely convincing, while Substream magazine effused, Daniel Radcliffe is precisely the presence who can make a film like Jungle work, and the film largely succeeds by being carried on his shoulders. Time Out Sydney, meanwhile, praised the actor for his commitment to the work, saying, Radcliffe throws himself wholeheartedly into the physical demands of this role. Given a solid lead performance from the always compelling Radcliffe, a based-on-fact story and survival situations depicted realistically enough to impress an actual survival expert, Jungle is one overlooked film that is perhaps ripe for rediscovery some 6 years after it vanished upon initial release. If nothing else, the movie serves as one more reminder that the star of the Harry Potter movies is much more than just an adorable young wizard. There seems to be great trepidation on MLAN's part to simply allow Radcliffe to communicate the character's own internalized emotions. Instead, he employs visual gimmickry as cheap support. It's a shame because Radcliffe carries Jungle on his shoulders when Memlan or Justin Mano's script lets him. He admirably throws himself into this role and plays Yossi as a kid who got into an adventure that was way over his head. He excels at channeling Yossi's frustration with his own rudimentary exploration skills, like when he realizes he's spent the day walking in a circle, or when he can't get the rescue plane overhead to see his location. He stumbles occasionally when he has to monologue his own fears. His shaky Israeli accent is mostly to blame, but it's primarily a physical role, and luckily, he's up to the task. There's still great charge in watching the former Harry Potter as an emaciated wreck, crawling through the brush while screaming for help. Despite its many obvious flaws, a shaky dialogue, unsettled sound design, a strong tendency to visually explicate simple ideas, a Yossi story has enough weight on its own to render Jungle a moderately compelling survival flick. The film is on solid ground when it relies solely on the unique dangers of the Amazon, like in the film's best scene when Yossi finds a parasite lodged in his forehead and must use tweezers to extract it. Moreover, Yossi's straightforward plight makes him a strong protagonist and keeps the audience invested in his struggle to stay alive. Begrudgingly, I admit in many circumstances, such as 127 Hours, 2010 Into the Wilder 2007, and A Touching the Voya 2003, a survival stories create compelling film narratives. Alas, the film A Jungly 27A is nowhere near as good as those films I mention, but it provides a means to escape to the dark corners of the Amazon from the comfort of one's own living room. Adamic characters we follow into said jungle are led by Daniel Radcliffe's Yossi. He and two friends decide against the advice every audience member screaming at the screen to broaden their selfish adventurous spirits by going native with Thomas Kretschmann's shady German guide. Safe to say, after experiencing the unforgiving terrain, torrential rain, and strange creatures in the jungle, this middle-class trio find they are well out of their depth. Thus, very slowly, the film crawls like a giant slug toward further catastrophe. Jungly 27A is not a bad film, but it isn't a particularly good one. The direction and cinematography are excellent, and Daniel Radcliffe proves he is an exceptionally honest actor. Radcliffe works his guts out with a shell of a character we rarely care about or empathize with. Perhaps that's the point. Maybe it's a cautionary tale about how Yossi stops being such a no and learns to appreciate life and the environment. My main issue was the screenplay, which rushes to get us in the jungle and then takes an age to get to the real drama. What was great about a film like IA Into the Wilder 2007, also based on a true story, was Christopher McCandless was a character who rejected society to find his own place in the world. He wasn't just a tourist on a holiday that went a bit wrong. I mean, Ina Jungly 2017, people lost their lives. But the greatest tragedy was the film doesn't make us care about them at all. In Jungle, as young Israeli adventurer Yossi Ginsberg, Daniel Radcliffe, and his just-meet traveling companions Kevin, Alex Russell, and Marcus Joel Jackson make their way through thick, forbidding Amazon forest in uncharted Bolivia. You think surely we're heading toward a cannibal reckoning. That's because the director, Australian horror Mr. Greg McLean, Wolf Creek, the darkness is at heart of visceralist, a fire ant bite merits a zoomed close-up. And when the trio's enigmatic guide, a tantalizing Thomas Kretschmann, kills and cooks a monkey, every tear and bite is a virtuoso piece of Foley crunch. Jungle is a true story based on Ginsberg's memoir of his disastrous 1981 track, and the real meat of a tape pun intended isn't fantastical. Yossi gets separated and must fight punishing nature and his deteriorating self just to survive. But eventually, that mismatch up for boating genre terrors with triumph of endurance adventure gives Jungle a problem of momentum and drama, wherein it never feels exactly bracing or revelatory. Despite the considerable physicality of vibe, the movie, with its impressive cinematography and radish believable all-in disintegration, it's more earthbound slog than psychological deep dive. Even more head-scratching, the movie ends with catch-up info that reveals a larger, unsolved mystery about that ill-fated journey, and suddenly Ginsberg's unprecedented survival pales in comparison to the other teasingly suspenseful movie that starts unspooling in your head. Daniel Radcliffe is doing an accent. That's the first thing that grabs your attention in The Jungle, which opens with the brave British actor intoning an opening narration over a blank screen. He introduces the themes of adventure and exploration, explaining why his character will venture into the Amazon rainforest a bit later on. It's not the most remarkable opening, but it'll do. And that same sentiment could sum up the film that follows. Jungle is another survival film about a young man who's way out of his depth. Straight of the gate, it's got a fair bit to prove if it wants to stand out from the pack. The film's based on a true story tag as its USP. Radcliffe plays the real-life Israeli explorer Yossi Ginsberg, who at the age of 21 undertook an ill-advised trek into uncharted jungle with 3 people that he barely knew. A teacher from Switzerland named Marcus, played by Joel Jackson, an American, photographer named Kevin Alex Russell, and an Austrian explorer named Karl Thomas Kretschmann. As you might expect, nothing goes particularly to plan. Justin Monjo, writer of 14 Arc Scappy episodes, adapted Ginsberg's Saw Jungle autobiography into a screenplay, meaning that much of the true story remains intact. Wolf Greek's Greg McLean directed the subsequent feature, providing a safe pair of hands. The result is fine. A film that gets from A to B to C. A retelling the origin of the expedition, the troubles the men faced, and how it all ended up. The film itself feels a bit generic. The opening scenes say where backpackers meet and chat about their journeys. They emanate a warm wholesomeness, but do little to set up the characters in any meaningful way. Roddy recites narration at the start to hurry things along, and then his voice of God readings disappear altogether. The expandition is put into motion, and it looks like a bad idea pretty much immediately. The group begins falling apart and breaking up before we've really got to know any of the characters. There's nothing in the first half of the film to really get you emotionally engaged. Most troublingly, none of the characters are interesting enough to make you care about them. You've got 3 archetypal gap-year backpackers and 1 vaguely mysterious older gay. That's all you really know about them. So, when they get into danger or start bickering or whatever, there's no hook to keep you attached. It doesn't help that when push comes to shove and things start to go properly bad, it's a shakily directed rafting sequence that propels the narrative forward. This should be a tense and horrifying scene, a vital turning point to up the stakes significantly. But it just doesn't resonate. The camera is shaking. The actors are shouting a lot, and it simply doesn't feel real. It's down to Radcliffe to save the day, and thankfully, he grinds out a grueling performance that really livens up the film's third act. When everything else falls away, and we're left with just Yossi on his own in survival mode, the film vastly improves. The script throws a lot at him. Flashbacks, hallucinations, dream sequences, starvation, confusion, desperation. And Radcliffe handles it all. This is another one of those films where he proves himself as a leading man. Jungle is miles away from Radcliffe's previous survival in the Wilderness movie, A Swiss Army Man, which just proves his dexterity as an actor. Whereas last time, he was a comedic torto force of a farting corpse, here Radcliffe goes to Christian Bale and The Machinist. The levels of personal degradation to bring his character's suffering to life. The rafting sequence may not feel real, but Yossi's turmoil afterwards does. It's a shame that Radcliffe's sublime third act turn couldn't have come after 2 acts of stellar setup. This film could have been something special if the other characters were developed more, or if the action direction was a bit stronger. As it stands, though, it'll do. There are moments in Jungle where you genuinely feel worried for Yossi, despite the fact that you know he survives and gets a book deal. Regardless of the film's flaws, that's no small feat, and you've got to applaud Radcliffe, Boncho, and McLean for pulling it off. By the end, you won't even notice that Radcliffe is doing an accent. Over the last few years, Daniel Radcliffe has been doing his damnedest to separate his image from the character that brought him fame, and he may have finally done so, as he finds himself bearded and riding around in the mud. He's lost in the woods again. But unlike his stintiness Swiss Army Man, he has been stripped of his ability to double as a flatulence-powered water vehicle and use of his directorial erection to find civilization. Instead, He is leading the charge as real-life wilderness survivor, Yossi Ginsberg in a Jungle, a man versus nature movie you've undoubtedly seen before, from Australian schlicky horror director Greg McLean, Wolf Creek, Atabelco Experiment. The film transports us to the fall of 1981 as Ginsberg embarks upon an expedition of the Bolivian Amazon jungle with two kindred spirits, Alex Russell and Joel Jackson, and a gruff, hardened guide, Thomas Kretschmann. As seasoned viewers might expect, the rainforest is unforgiving, and soon Ginsberg is stranded without amenities or any way of making it to the nearest village alive. Jungly takes a while to get started. The first half of the movie is perfectly safe for grandma, with loads of pleasant jungle scenery, cheeky platitudes, and working montages set to jangly guitar music. However, halfway through, the audience is sent on a darkly grim turn, beginning with the scene in which an unidentifiable animal is beaten to death, ripped apart, and then eaten. The bridge between the movie's tonal halves is so thin that it calls into question why we even needed both of them. It's difficult to image a viewer who is fully on board with all that this haphazard disconnect and moods has to offer. The film's most obnoxious sin is that it is never able to even remotely capture the gravity of its protagonist's situation. Ginsberg's is a tale of survival that is extraordinary on a domestic level, but in the cinematic realm, it is almost entirely indistinguishable from the others of a Silk. Perhaps because it is never given adequate screen time, his struggle for survival lacks any sense of urgency. The actual details of the event are almost certainly gritty and spine-tingling, but we never get that impression from the pieces presented to us. Woolly Jungly tries on the clothes of based on a true story films like IA, Into the Wilder, and The 127 Hours. They hang loosely as it becomes increasingly clear that Greg McLean has no earthly idea what made those narratives impactful. The weight of the material is all but lost, with the slight exception of the exigency brought on by the lofty performances. The supporting cast are all serviceable, but it is Daniel Radcliffe who shines, mainly due to the fact that he appears to be under the impression that he is starring in a much more serious film. Out of his Harry Potter cohort, his post-wizardry career continues to be the most promising. Jungly can never decide if it wants to go full Disney or veer hard into the grisly nature of its tale, and it isn't willing to do the legwork necessary to connect its two minds. Yossi Ginsberg has an arresting story to tell, and one that many audiences have forgotten, if they ever knew it to begin with. But its journey to the screen doesn't do it any favors. McLean flirts with his lead character's sense of wonder, astonishing resilience, and existential dread. But anyone interested would be better off watch one of the numerous similar films released in the past few years. Even though Jungly is based on true events, it feels inescapably disingenuous, choosing not to lead what some might call a conventional life. Yossi Ginsberg decides to travel the world and find out what else life has to offer. Played brilliantly by Daniel Radcliffe, Israeli-born Yossi plans to only travel for 1 year before returning to his family. Whilst on his travels in South America, Yossi befriends the Swedish Marcus Stam, Joel Jackson, and by chance they both run into one of Marcus's closest friends, an American called Kevin Gale, Alex Russell. As the time for Kevin and Marcus to return to their regular everyday lives draws ever closer, Yossi finds himself not quite ready to give up the nomadic life he has come to love. So when Karl Rouge Brechter Thomas Kretschmann, a charismatic and experienced explorer, befriends Yossi and tells him about a hidden world deep within the Amazon jungle, the chance for Arla adventure off the beaten track seems just too good to miss. Yossi eventually persuades his two pals to at least meet with Karl before they turn down this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. With promises of enough gold to fill their pockets and the chance for Kevin to take some photographs more than worthy of National Geographic. Not mention the thrill and excitement of seeing a part of the world others only dream of. The three friends begin the preparations for the ultimate adventure into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. The three of them blindly follow Karl into the jungle, putting their faith and trust in a man they've only just met. But not without good reason. As Carl explains, he's been through the jungle on many occasions, leading thrill-seekers just like them into the depths of the rainforest in search of excitement. It also helps that Carl talks the talk and definitely walks the walk. He's the strong, confident type, but also the type that gives the impression he's not one to cross or challenge. As they get farther and farther from civilization, heading deeper into the beautiful but harsh jungle, the elements start to take their toll and cause the group to split up, half taking the river and half continuing on foot in order to reach their destination. This is where things start to go from bad to worse. Yossi eventually finds himself separated from everyone, as well as from all the supplies they packed. All alone, with no food or shelter, Yossi is forced to survive using what little knowledge he already has and from the few skills he's managed to pick up from Carl. Jungly works extremely well in its ability to showcase the sumptuous and beautiful scenery as well as the devastating effects it can have on those who venture into it without having the necessary skills. The cinematography is breathtaking in places, something you could imagine Richard at Unboro narrating. Glorious overhead shots display the sheer scale of the rainforest as well as making, albeit briefly, a reference to the ecological impact we humans are having on it. It's easy to get drawn into the story of survival our main characters face and forget that this is a film based on the actual experiences of the real-life Yossi, as told in his book Jungle, a harrowing true story of survival. The film is well directed by Greg McLean, Wolf Creek, who manages to keep engagement levels peaked throughout by steadily increasing the tension as our characters' situations become more severe. Radcliffe as well, and truly shed any threat of being pigeonholed or typecast from his time spent as Harry Potter. Radcliffe is great as Yossi, once again proving his diversity as an actor, delivering a strong performance and a decent accent to boot that didn't seem to falter at any point. Carl's character is played by Kretschmann with the seriousness that implies something sinister lurks beneath the surface. He is a man that is not to be questioned. Even though the roles of the two friends take something of a back seat compared to Yossi, they are both equally important and vital to the series of events that unfolds. They are also played equally well by Jackson and Russell, two polar opposites that find their friendship and their endurance pushed to the limits. Jungly is one of those films where you can't help but imagine yourself in the same situation, and it works extremely well in putting you in the position of the characters on screen, especially Yossi. Even though, ultimately, you know how it will end, there are still a few surprises and a bit of misdirection thrown in to keep you on your toes. It's a thrilling story with a couple of real stomach-turn-earning moments that highlight just how cruel the jungle can be. Ever since his resounding success with the Harry Potter franchisee, Daniel Radcliffe has continued to push the boundaries of his acting career with fantastic and varied performances in both A Swiss Army Man and Imperium. Now Radcliffe has completed one of his most physically demanding roles yet, portraying Yossi Ginsberg, an Israeli adventurer who became stranded alone in the Bolivian Amazon for 3 weeks back in 1981. Directed by Agram Lena Wolf Creek, the survival thriller follows Yossi Ginsberg along with his two friends, Kevin, Alex Russell, and Marcus Joel Jackson, who go on a once-in-a-lifetime trek through the uncharted Amazon, led by Carl Rupter, Thomas Kretschmann, a self-proclaimed expert of the area. But they soon realize they are no match for this uncharted wilderness as it begins to physically and mentally break them down. Jungly tells a very intense, dramatic, and at times very horrific story that does a good job at putting you in Yossi's shoes, allowing you to experience what he must have endured back in 1981. The plot moves along at a very fast pace, which helps keep the adrenaline pumping, but sometimes progresses a little too fast for its own good. The performances are largely very strong, especially from Radcliffe, but there are some that don't quite stand out as much. A great use of cinematography and score manipulation gives the film a very psychological feel, adding another layer of intrigue to the story. But where Jungly is incredible in depicting certain individual moments of truth, the overall story feels very structured and familiar to the survival thriller genre. I will start with the directing effort by McLean, who I believe was integral in conveying the horror and intensity associated with Yos's journey through the Amazon. Hearing him talk briefly at the screening about the production of the film, I really got a feel for how he strove to get the most authentic representation of events possible, involving a ton of location scouting and putting Radcliffe through some tough but necessary situations. This all pays off, as this authenticity has you believing Radcliffe is really enduring all of these grueling labors, and only further enhances your engagement with the events on screen. There are a number of horrific sequences that occur throughout the film that combine unsettling and confronting imagery with a pounding and chilling score that I don't believe would have been effective without the input of McLean. His background in horror is on full display here, and the way he pulls it off is very well done, considering there is no supernatural presence or axe-wielding murderer to make use of. This is purely a man versus nature story, and Mother Nature, being as ruthless and unforgiving as she is, plays very well as the origin of danger and horror responsible for breaking down this group of adventurers. As far as the performances go, Radcliffe is undoubtedly the standout here, mainly because he is the core focus of almost the entire runtime, once again as he did in 2016's Imperium. He disappears into the role, and you forget you are watching Harry Potter rummaging through the jungle and just get sucked into the world from his performance. The accent helps to sell the character to us, but the desperation and pain he exhibits through his facial expressions and changing body chemistry as the film progresses works wonders for allowing you to get an idea of the effects of nature on his physical and mental state. Kretschmann King Kong was very solid in the film, and despite not having a ton of screen time, along with the rest of the main cast, I thought he played his character really well, and if the story had permitted, I'd have loved to see more of him. As for Alex Russell and Joel Jackson, though I wasn't very convinced by their performances as Yossi's friends, they each have a moment or two where they are able to shine, but overall, I thought they were pretty average with their line delivery and just selling the situation they're in. Now, where this film does drama and intensity really effectively at a fast pace, it is most definitely not without a few flaws. At least the first third to maybe the first half of the runtime is spent introducing you to the key characters, showing you their morals and attitudes, and giving you time to get to know them before starts to go down. I do think this could have been tightened up just a tad. The build-up was good, but it started to lose a bit of steam at some points, probably due to trying to cover a bunch of times so quickly, but this was one of the more minor flaws that didn't bother me too much. Another minor flaw was it did become a little difficult understanding the passing of time whilst Radcliffe was stranded in the jungle. One scene, it has taken 20 minutes or so to have progressed 6 days, and next thing you know, 20-30 minutes later, it's been 3 weeks. This is irritating when trying to understand the timing of events whilst in the theater. But my major criticism mentioned briefly above is that where the film has moments of ingenuity and greatness. Overall, the film seems to follow a familiar start-to-finish structure that most of these survival thrillers adopt. This could be a result of the true survival story happening to follow this structure. But there are other ways to break form and still tell the same story. Though occasionally, there is a bright spot, a film that transcends the trappings of this most over-out and overexposed of genres. It feels as if the majority of these movies are satisfied with coasting along on the interest of the true story itself, rather than finding some sort of reason to justify telling a thesis story out of the time. They simply exist them tepid and without purpose. On the one hand, you have Jean-Marc Valley's A Wild or Sean Penn's Into the Wild. On the other, you have a jungle unveiling, as the opening night film of this year is Melbourne International Film Festival. A Jungle is director McLean's recounting of young backpacker Yossi Ginsberg's hellish ordeal in the Bolivian rainforest in the early 1980s. Separated from his fellow adventurers, Ginsberg, here portrayed by a more than game Daniel Radcliffe, was stranded alone in the Amazon for 3 weeks, battling the elements and barely surviving encounters with dangerous threats, both natural and psychological. It's an incredible story. It's just a shame that it's made for such a lackluster film adaptation. MLAN, known primarily for more straightforward genre fare in the form of the Wolf Creek films, gets things off to a rocky start. Early stretches detail the formation of this group of young men, filled out by American photographer Kevin Gale, Alex Russell, and Swiss teacher Marcus Stamm, Joel Jackson A., and how they came to be. Duped by would-be guide Carl Ryu Pretor, Thomas Kretschmann, who led them on a doomed journey to a non-existent tribe of natives. Here, only the barest attempts at characterization are made, and are only made somewhat passable by the amiable chemistry shared between the three leads. But as the characters are conned by Ryu Pretor and follow him into the jungle, every decision and action they make feels preordained, and not from the truth of how things actually happened, but by the laziness and impatience of the script. Entire scenes play out in the most glitch a copyright D way imaginable, as if whole conversations had been created from an amalgamation of lines from other better screenplays. There's no specificity, no sense of how people actually interact. Every scene feels like the result of a checkbox on a list of required moments. Here's the part where they meet, they argue, they distrust each other, they walk, they fight, until the film finally gets to the point it's actually interested in, which is Ginsberg's time alone in the jungle. And while there are some impressive set pieces, the problem is that by then, the story has lost all weight. We don't care about these people because the work hasn't been put in to make them fully fleshed out human beings. Which is ironic because Alia literally are. Worse still, this feeling of breezing over the greatest hits of this story doesn't disappear. Each said piece of body horror or a natural calamity comes at regular intervals and without any sense of accumulated impact, which means that at no point do we forget that this is a tale of survival and feel any sort of legitimate fear for Yossi. The stakes simply aren't there. Even with this in mind, if the film were a technical achievement, this rather glaring flaw would at least be somewhat forgivable. Heck, Atharin fooled people into thinking it was a good film based almost entirely on its cinematography. But alas, that is not the case here. Everything has an odd sheen to it, an overly low quality that removes any sense of verisimilitude from proceedings, leaving everything feeling strangely safe for a film about a man who came incredibly close to death in such a dangerous place. And where other similar better films find a way to tie their stories of survival into grander themes. Say, for instance, man's relationship with nature, or the spiritual toll of such suffering, or how much Leonardo DiCaprio is willing to do to win an Oscar. Only frustratingly brief attempts at developing actual thematic impact appear very late in the game, at which point they are immediately overshadowed by some of the worst dialogue. This side of a Michael Bay movie, with one line in particular that I honestly could not believe someone would still think was a good idea in 2017. Seriously. Now, though the cast is charismatic and eager, and the story it's based on is indeed astonishing, the film is a disappointingly limp affair. While it tells Yossi Ginsberg's story with a clear reverence for the man himself, it forgets to actually be a film in the process. Self-preservation is an instinct that all living organisms share. When faced with near impossible challenges, something within awakens, and survival is the only option. Even if death would be much easier, sometimes in half, the worst of situations, the best of a person, is able to emerge and live to tell the best stories. The new Thrill Jungly is a true story based on the events of a young Israeli man, Yossi Ginsberg, and is based on his autobiography, A Jungle, a harrowing true story of survival, of his lonely survival in the uncharted jungles of Bolivia, directed by Australia's Greg McLean. Wolf Creek, 2005, The Darkness, 2016, A Jungly became available on-demand digital HD on October 20th through Momentum Pictures and Challenges for one of the biggest surprise films of 2017. In 1981, Thirst for Adventure and Something Other Than an Ordinary Life leads three friends, Z. Yossi Daniel Radcliffe, Harry Potter series, Victor Frankenstein, 2015, Kevin Alex Russell, Chronicle 2012, Carrie, 2013, and Marcus Joel Jackson, Peter Allen, Not the Boy Next Door, 2015. Safe Harbor, 2017. Adelaz, Bolivia, It Is There. Yossi meets Carl Thomas Kretschmann, a King Kong 2005, Wanted 2008, an Austrian geologist who tells him tales of a hidden Indian village and gold deep within the jungle. Carl insists that he has visited the tribe before and that they are all friends of his. He tells Yossi that he can take him there if he really wants to go. Yossi is excited to see something pure and untouched, quickly getting Kevin on board with the adventure. Marcus is hesitant, but eventually concedes so that he is not left out. The four head into the jungle with only Carl as their guide. At first, everything is going as planned. The jungle is beautiful, and the foursome are enjoying the long track. Before long, though, Marcus begins to have issues with his feet. They are swollen and bloody. There is no way he will be able to continue walking. Kevin convinces the group to make a raft and get on the river, since Carl insisted the tribe was somewhere along the route. There are obstacles, and Kevin and Carl begin to fight. Carl tells them he will be walking for the rest of the way, but Kevin wants to continue on the river. Yossi knows that Marcus is in bad shape, but does not want to leave Kevin alone. The group agrees to separate. Carl will walk with Marcus, and Yossi will continue on the river with Kevin. It is not long before Kevin and Yossi hit dangerous rapids. Kevin gets to shore safely, but Yossi does not, effectively separating the pair. Yossi is now completely alone in a foreign jungle. Finding the tribe and gold no longer matters. All that matters is finding his friends and surviving the elements of the wild, dangerous jungle. Every step and minute poses new threats and obstacles for Yossi. Can he find his friends? Can he find his way out of the jungle in one piece? Will his mind remain intact through all the challenges and isolation? Not all actors can hold their own with nature as their main adversary. That said, Radcliffe is the sole actor on the screen through the majority of the film, and his performance is magnificent. Watching him evolve from a clean, happy young man looking for something more out of life to an emaciated, dirty, half-dead man doing everything he can to get back to his friends is inspiring. Though the acting overall in A Jungly is amazing, it is easy to forget anyone else exists. As Radcliffe dominates the screen with one of the most believable performances of his career, the viewer cannot help but cheer for his successes and weep for the dangers he faces. He is successfully able to convey a man just desperate to hold on to his sanity and survive. Yossi Ginsberg's true story of survival is incredible on its own. MLAN and screenplay writer Justin Monjobé 2012, The Turning 2013 were expertly able to capture the dire situation that Yossi faced in those 3 weeks. Most based on truce to worry, movies fall flat in emotion and fill the film with nothing but facts. It is quite the opposite with The Jungly, because the viewer is able to feel like a participant even though Yossi is all alone in the jungle. Yossi encountered so many different issues in the jungle that it is not hard to imagine it was difficult to choose what to include, and not with what is shown on screen alone is harrowing and amazing. Adding almost anything else would have taken away from the film. It would have also made the viewer not as interested in finding out everything possible of the real Yossi. That is the true testament of a film that is based on truth, wanting to learn as much as possible of the real persons behind the action. Give the viewer an even stronger, the classic man versus nature film. Nature is an untamed beast that oftentimes will get the better of those not mentally or physically prepared. Sometimes, though, even the most fit can become the victim of a world where man dares not to touch. It's hard to say whether Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, about a group of teenagers who turn into video game characters, is a sequel to the 1995, a Robin Williams hit Jumanji, a remake, a reboot, or something else. But it's definitely the kind of movie that works the name of a classic rock song into its title and makes sure to blast it during the end credits, so that people who were in their 20s during the 1990s and now have kids of their own and probably took them to this film can feel that Pavlovian tinglia. That description makes the new Jumanji sound like a cash grab. And in a lot of ways, it is. Studios are so enamored with the notion that pre-existing intellectual properties are box office insurance that they're far more likely to greenlight this than something genuinely new. Even though exactly no one has spent the last 2 decades saying, "I wish somebody would make another Age." At the same time, though, this is a likable, funny diversion, and sometimes more than that. It has enough twists and surprises to pull viewers along, despite the fact that writer-director and Jake Kasdan's story, co-written with 4 people, is ultimately not much meatier than the one from a 1990s video game that the characters end up inhabiting after getting sentenced to a breakfast club-type detention at school. In the original film, the titular diversion is an old-fashioned board game, just like in the source material, Chris Vanberg's popular children's book. The protagonists here, Area Spencer, Alex, Wolf, and Ernest Nerd Spencer's one-time best friend, Fridge Sir Darius, Blaine, a football star who ends up grounded after authorities realize Alex wrote a homework assignment for him. Bethany Madison, Iceman, a classic snotty Heather type who's addicted to her smartphone and takes selfies constantly, and the bookish, socially anxious Martha, Morgan Turner. They all have insecurities and issues once they end up inside the Jumanji video game. These same characters are played by Adwayne Johnson as Spencer the Nerd, a Kevin Hart as Fridge the Jock, a Karen Gill, Anna as the super fit avatar of Martha, and the Jack Black of all people as Bethany. There are supposed to be 5 characters in the game space, though, and we meet the 5th in due time. Alex Vec, Nick Jonas, who was introduced as an energetic teenager in the film's 1996 prologue, only to get sucked into the game and become the local missing boy whose endlessly grieving family still lives in their now decrepit house. The body-switching gag threatens to wear out its welcome quickly. Ha. The scrawny nerd looks like Dwayne Johnson now, and the awkward girl has washboard abs. But the actors take their assignments to play teenagers so seriously that the film serves along on a wave of poker face earnestness, mixing moments of pios in with its super broad slapstick. Except for a Dan Castellan, it is Homer Simpson. Nobody screams in pain more hilariously than Kevin Hart. At certain points, you might feel as though you're watching the longest, most lavishly produced Saturday Night Live sketch ever, complete with lush jungle scenery. The film was shot partly on location in Hawaii, and attacks by CGI hippos, rhinos, monkeys, crocodiles, and the like. But since the entire thing plays like a 10-year-old's Disney Channel fantasy of what adolescence will be like, it works well enough, especially when coupled with intense discussions of the game's rules, how many lives you get, how many levels there are, how to lift the curse from the land, etc. Both the video game's construction and its gender politics are very A90s. The movie is aware of this and makes fun of, though there is a bit of an eat your cake and have it too aspect to the way it puts Johnson and Gillen's baddies on display. There are occasional jolts of mayhem, thanks mainly to the motorcycle-riding ninjas who do the bidding of the movie's villain, John Van Beltel. Bobby Cannavale, a demonic figure who wants to control the Jaguar's eye and claim dominion over the land. The action scenes are constructed with a bit of pack and manage to be exciting, though you're never seriously worried that any major character is going to lose all of their lives. Kasdan, a veteran filmmaker who happens to be the son of Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Empire Strikes Back screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan, has an old-school sense of how to build those kinds of sequences. The shots are thoughtfully composed for the most part, and you always know where you are and what's at stake from moment to moment. The script scenarios allow for charming, often faintly surreal, funny character moments, as when Black's round yet flouncy Bethany instructs Gillen's super fit but still physically awkward Martha on how to be sexy. Black's Hey Sailor walk evokes Bugs Bunny in drag, and Gillen's subsequent seductive dance to distract some guards looks as if she's trying to shake sand out of her shorts while simultaneously dealing with a bad case of swimmer's ear. The film doesn't have the nerve to follow some of its more subversive ideas, such as Bethany lusting after Alex, to their logical conclusions, probably because this is an expensive project that's terrified of alienating a certain sector of the public. Imagine the walkouts if Jack Black lip-locked with Nick Jonas in something other than a CPR situation. But it's still more surprising in more ways than it had to be. and the performers are clearly having such fun playing insecure teenagers that you stay involved even when the thinness of the enterprise becomes undeniable. This is a 2.5-star movie, honestly bumped up a notch because the actors are likable. The film doesn't have a cruel thought in its head, and the sentimental finale feels earned. I'm convinced those critically castigating Greg Mlan's new film Jungle A, based on the O.C. Ginsberg's autobiographical bestseller, Jungle, a harrowing true story of survival, a have never been at the mortal and clemency of Mother Nature themselves. Otherwise, more empathetic leeway would be given to what most seem to think is a cliché till the copyright-ridden anticlimactic slog. I did not find this to be the case at all, and rather appreciate Mlan's favor in grounded realism over generic sensationalism. Not only is Jungle a soaring rebound for Mlan after last year's Incipitantra, the darkness set and middling thriller, the Belko experiment at its heart, the movie serves as an uplifting affirmation of humanity's triumph of will. Moreover, it continues a long line of dogged performances by a postbotter Daniel Radcliffe, who is tasked and taxed with a grueling turn that is inspiring at best, admirable at worst. Straight up, if you enjoy true stories that are so unfathomable they need to be seen to be believed, do wise and take a tour through the Jungle when it drops in select theaters. And on VOD Friday, October 21st, after serving a 3-year tour in the Israeli army, Yossi Ginsberg, Radcliffe finds himself backpacking through La Paz, Bolivia in 1980. He meets a Swiss schoolteacher named Marcus Joel Jackson, with whom he becomes fast friends and traveling companions. The two happen to run into one of Marcus' other friends, Kevin, Alex Russell, an American photographer, and the trio continuing through the continent as one. Then one night, Yossi is recruited by an enigmatic bushman named Carl Thomas Kretschmann, who seduces the young man with the exotic promise of what the jungle has to offer. Soon, all 4 men are trekking deep into the Amazon jungle, following Carl's experience, lead through thicket of dense tropical foliage, and route to a local village where they can rest up, eat well, bathe in bandage, and ready for an extended exploration. Of course, Mother Nature has, in different designs, fatigue-fueled tension begins to tear a rift in the group dynamic. Marcus' feet becomes so torn up he begins to slow down the buck, progress leading to the resentment of others. Animus erupts, sides are formed. Soon the force and cleave into halves. Carl and Marcus plan to walk out in a 3-day trek, while Yossi and Kevin decide to raft down the Tui River and sightsee a bit more on their way back to civilization. The perilous mission of the latter proves too much, and soon, Yossi is separated from Kevin, left alone to his own devices to survive in the poor, most unforgiving of natural habitats. The movie charts the course of Yossi's 19-day excursion, a descent into increasingly hellish and torturous terrain that no man with the weak constitution and lack of faith could ever endure. Yet with snakes, jaguars, monkeys, birds, even skin-boring worms and malnourished hallucinations to contend with, that's precisely what Yossi must accomplish. What works so well in the movie is, much like the jungle itself, is just how dense, colorful, and teeming with life the whole endeavor is. Shot on location on the Gold Coast in Australia. The tactile very similar to the feeling like we're right there in the jungle with Yossi cannot be overstated. No green screens, controlled environments, or cozy studio settings here. Mlan does a really good job of creating a palpable sense of his surroundings. The sights and sounds really lend for a specifically immersive time and place. No doubt, his work on Boda Wolf Krika and the Roya has served him well here in what is easily his most mature work to date. To that end, by keeping in line with the realistic over the ridiculous, Mlan's restraint, and simply telling what is a true story instead of going overboard with crowd-pleasing thrill rides and sensationalistic excitement. A point of criticism for most, mind you, is one of the wiser choices the director could have made. This story is perfectly compelling enough on its own without the artifice of manufactured enthrallment, and I for one am glad Mlan chose not to turn this into another flashbang bombardment of contrived Hollywood action-adventure stylings. At the heart of Jungle, however, is the performance of Daniel Radcliffe, who again acquits himself as a serious performer who is proactively distancing himself from his wizardly past. This lad has put forth a series of demanding, offbeat, dedicated performances. And here he carries the emotional and physical brunt of retelling Ginsberg's unimaginably horrific true-life experience. Buried under an emaciated frame, thick beard, and even thicker Israeli accent, Radcliffe utterly commits himself to this role, and his soulful performance goes a long way in making Jungle a truly arresting watch. Sure, somehow lambasted McLean for having Yossi talk to himself and to his conjured hallucinations, but seriously, what the hell would you do if you were lost in the jungle for nearly 3 weeks by yourself? Remain silent. Never cry out for help. This is by no means a detractor in the narrative, nor is the false claim of an overly schmezzy conclusion. Again, this story really happened, and anyone who suffered the harsh cruelty of Mother Nature for any prolonged period will recognize its diricity. All things considered, Jungle is McLean's best movie since Wolf Creek. He filmmakers behind The Jungle, based on a true story account of survival in extremists, take their time gathering together their main players and getting them into the titular habitat. Yossi Daniel Radcliffe, an eager and charming Israeli, is roughing it in Bolivia, searching for adventure. He ingests native psychotropics with an anonymous pretty young woman, Lily Sullivan, who reads aloud to him from Camus, A Happy Death. While they loll in hammocks soon, he joins up with 2 similarly minded young men, Marcus Joel Jackson, a Swiss school teacher on sabbatical, and Kevin Alex Russell, a photographer. Together, they decide to follow Carl Thomas Kretschmann, a mysterious man Yossi meets on the streets of La Paz into the Amazon, with promises of guided access to remote areas, secret tribes, and not-for-tourist experiences. The film's first third is chock-block with platitudes about Wanderlust, the wisdom of tribal peoples, and society's misguided relationship to nature. It adheres to a structure that director Greg McLean used in 2005's A Wolf Creek, slowly familiarizing us with its hit characters so that even if they're not exactly likable, they're sympathetic in their recognizable humanity. That way, when the bad stuff eventually happens, viewers will really root for them. After all, you don't come to a film like iJungle for its storm room wisdom, but for the terror you hope the horror filmmaker, as proven as McLean, will muster in the dark and feral depths of uncharted rainforest, Earth's final frontier. McLean and screenwriter Justin Manuel faithfully hit the key plot points of Yossi Ginsberg's 1993 book, Back from Tuya, but failed to sell the severity of the threats Yossi confronts. The foursome split up, and Yossi and Kevin continue down the Beni River in a jungle-rigged draft. But then an accident separates them, and Yossi is stranded, alone in the hostile wilderness. With limited supplies and no food, he faces obstacles, but each just on inexplicably so, as though chasing off one jaguar once would scare them all off forever. While the scares don't quite work, McLean revels in a different aspect of horror thrillers. The gross-out Yossi eats raw bird embryos straight from eggs as navy blue as his eyes. He cuts open a head wound and squeezes out a worm. He pulls off his socks to reveal hideously ulcerated fungus-infected feet. The sound department emphasizes every bone-cracking chomp and tongue-sloshing squish of monkey meat eaten straight off its fire-roasted corpse. McLean and Mio keep Cliff talking throughout, presumably, to keep the audience engaged in Yossi's cell. Survival trials. Though the actor dominates the screen just through the intensity of his body language and emotions roaring in his eyes, Yossi deals with his own jungle version of space. Madness, battling delirium, despair, and various hallucinations, meaning we frequently accompany him to an American-style diner or a high-end casino, where he wears a tuxedo and the most beautiful woman present throws herself at him. Women appear in the film almost only as fantasies. The non-native woman he meets or dreams about are sex objects, while the racially caricatured and possibly imagined indigenous woman, Yasmin Kassing, he meets in the forest, gives his male ego something to protect and chase Lee Spoon at night. Jungle doesn't benefit from comparisons to other recent works about Central and South American exploration. It has none of the gravitas of James Grace or David Grand, Sad the Lost City of Sea, and it conjures just a fraction of the effortless terror inherent to the rainforest in Douglas Preston's book about unpeeled regions of Honduras, At the Lost City of the Monkey God, whose pages crawl with infinite cockroaches, super-Ursized killer snakes, and angry monkeys that seemed never before to have seen humans, as if to compensate for such deficiencies. McLean drenches his film in Johnny Clem's intrusive score for full orchestra, using it to try to evoke the fear, resiliency, and triumph that he should have expressed through the story and visuals. More than a decade after premiering A Wolf Kriya in Melbourne, director Greg McLean has returned to the festival that made his name with the jungle. Based on the memoir by Asa Ginsberg, an Israeli man who got himself lost in the Bolivian jungle in 1981, the new film apes the structure of McLean's horror breakout almost exactly, with three backpackers whose hedonism is rudely interrupted at this time by red dance and rapids instead of an outback serial killer. Wolf Creek, a riff on real-life figures, but was a work of queasily convincing fiction where he saw jungly claims to be a somber recounting of events. Though it has none of the idiosyncratic detail of real life, fronted by a committed Daniel Radcliffe sporting a bushy beard and creditable Israeli accent. This is a survival thriller without much in the way of you-know-what, and seems destined to land in the Amazon and bog into which films that satisfy neither grindus or artus are sucked. Screenwriter Justina Manoa Spear kicks things off with a short-lived voiceover in which Chelsea describes coming to Bolivia to escape the grind of an ordinary life. Landing in Laz, he hooks up with Marcus Joel Jackson, a smiling Swiss teacher, and Kevin Chronically star Alex Russell, an American photographer with dreams of getting his pictures in a National Geographic. That ambition is one reason the otherwise skeptical American agrees to make a trek into uncharted territory with Carl Thomas, a mysterious guide who follows a Yasa down an arrow lane to ask if he's an American in a scene that wouldn't be out of place in a Hostel sequel. Early scenes like this one feel hurried over by editor Shaw Life, with some, such as the first exchange between Marcus and Yosa, frankly inaudible, swallowed by the score from Milan regular John Klima, and presented as part of one long montage. The trek soon tests the loyalty of the new friends, with the gentle Marcus emerging as this story's Ned Bay character, Rena Deliverance slowed down by his horribly blistered feet. The school teacher's buddies begin to see him as an irritant, told they should turn back or remain where they are until Marcus can walk. They come up with a third option. They'll make a raft and sail down the rapids. Kevin and Carl almost come to blows after an aborted test run down the river, and a Yasukin drives to get rid of the dead weight, convincing Marcus to continue on foot with the German. While he and Kevin continue downstream, Radcliffe leans into Toyasness. But he's also calculating, sensitive enough to make his friend believe the plan to ditch him was his own idea. Shooting in Queensland, McLean and his cinematographer Stefani Dasha, who also shot 2013's Superior Survival Pico Canopy, employ lots of jagged handheld during the film's centerpiece rafting sequences, which are over almost before they've begun. With the makeshift vessel dashed against a raw candy swept away, the film's second half becomes a familiar series of close shaves, with Yossi battling creepy crawies, as well as the weather, starvation, and in a series of ill-judged dream sequences and flashbacks, his own hallucinations. One of them sees Radcliffe, now his recognizable shaven self, eating a burger in a fast food restaurant. Another has him at the dinner table back in Tel Aviv, enduring an earful from his disappointed father, Jasko Klemmen. None of these discursions illuminate much of anything, and their insertion feels like bet hedging by filmmakers intent on ginning up Yasis, a 3W Week X slow, with embellishing material, but it's Radcliffe trials that deliver the film's most vivid images. Some of them are delightfully gross, as when a Yasa cuts a live worm out of a wound on his forehead or eats a couple of eggs about to hatch. In scenes straight out of F. Apocalypto, he faces off with a predator up a tree and later pulls himself out of a bog with the aid of a particularly sturdy fond. The swiftly rising Russell makes a solid fist of what he's got to play, which isn't much, while Jackson imbusts the respected Marcus with touching shades of self-awareness. And Radku, in a performance that deserved a better vehicle, goes from a 21-year-old full of rash certainty to one full of regret, pulling off blood-caked socks while weeping an apology to his departed friend. there doesn't outwardly appear to be a psychiat. Sixth feature from happy horror specialist Greg McLean, but it turns out Mother Nature is more than happy to do the honors. A booby-trapped backpacker survival saga set in deepest Bolivia, based on a memoir by Israeli explorer Yossi Ginsberg. Jungle may ostensibly be a nobler departure from the exuberantly grisly genre, fare on which McLean has made his name but structurally and atmospherically, it has more in common with his smashing 2005 breakout Wolf Creek than you might guess. Taut and rattling in setup before losing its bearings in more ways than one is no, and of jungle fever cessed Daniel Radcliffe as agonized protagonist. This Melbourne Festival premiere should enjoy somewhat safer travels on the strength of its name appeal and handsome National Geographic veneer. Between last year's disappointing James Gunn scripted Gorfus the Belko Experiment and the muted resuscitation of Wolf Creek 3, McLean has picked an opportune moment to demonstrate his skills outside the bloodiest horror wheelhouse. Job done. His direction of more character-led adventure material is ruggedly polished and accomplished, though the wittier singularities of his filmmaking only emerge at the grosser extremes of its characters' collective blight. If you need a gut-wisting scene of a leech being dug out of a man's forehead using only tweezers, McLean's Gladly Your Man. Lacking quite the same degree of confidence is just in monoscript. Adapted from Ginsberg's 2006 bestseller Jungle, a harrowing true story of survival, which alternates between over-efficient shortcuts and storytelling, and characterization, and messy, unilluminating internal digressions into both clipped back and hallucinatory fantasy. The opening frame set up a lyrical, loquacious voiceover for Ginsberg, a fuzzy-faced rad sporting an acceptable Israeli accent, only for the device to be summarily abandoned moments later once he has declared his restless hunger for escape and earthly discovery. It's an appetite that has led him to reject his middle-class parents' expectations of college education in Tel Aviv. In 1981, not long after completing his naval service, he arrives in Bolivia, intent on following hordes of other dreamy 20-some travelers through the customary sightseeing excursions and psychotropic night trips. There he befriends kindly Swiss teacher Marcus, Joel Jackson, and alpha male American photographer Kevin, Alex Russell, and the threes swiftly become a firm unit. Bono and editor Shah Lure waste no time in cementing this core relationship, though a little more time exploring the bonds and fault lines between this trio of psychologically desperate men wouldn't go amiss as the film progresses. No one ever fully makes their jump from type to character. All three men, however, are open books compared to Carl Thomas Kretschmann, a surly, enigmatic, evidently seasoned German trail leader who offers Ginsberg an off-piste track to spectacular increases in a vast uncharted stretch of jungle. His approach is more menacing than inviting a true story or not. Audiences could be forgiven for wondering if he's a Teutonic cousin to Wolf Creek's outdoorsy Meller, but Ginsberg is swayed as eventually are his more skeptical cohorts into the unmapped undergrowth they go hellas to. Most reasonably viewers don't do it cries, whereupon things quickly unravel. Their gung-ho spirit, barely lasting past the first campfire shades of a more tropical deliverance ensue, as physical and emotional strain separates the men into factions, aggravated by a bout of perilous river rafting with the withering choral team unto himself throughout. His cloudy motivations remain the nervous source of tension in Jungle. Though whether he's brutish, male relevant, or simply out of his depth, he's not the most immediate threat in the wilderness. The film's second half, which subdivides the group by circumstance until Ginsberg is wholly isolated, plays as a veritable fear factor parade of jaguars, snakes, and assorted crawling nightmare fuel. Land and water-like prove impossible to master as a diminished explorer seeks sanctuary. While land keeps things lively with a handful of elemental jump scares, the narrative in this section turns as unummer and mudlogged as its protagonist with a series of increasingly gaudy dream sequences, delusions, and stray domestic flashbacks only superficially admitting viewers to his adult psyche. In a performance that by the end isn't far from merging into his recent Swiss Army man turn, Radcliffe suffers with credible agony and dignity. Though it's Australian up-and-comer Russell, who finds the most interesting grooves in his underwritten role, playing up both the cocky entitlement and gradually the stubborn integrity of a jockish archetype. Technical contributions are robust across the board, with Johnny Clemic's score blending conventional and more indigenous acoustic instrumentation to rather sprawl effect, resisting the dewier sonic cliches one might expect. And if the character's expedition still seems patently ill-advised, Stefan Dasho's sweeping, verdant, wide-screen lancing, and sure as we are, as drunkenly sold on the landscape, not Bolivia as it happens, but a convincing combination of Colombia and Queensland. A dot is the thing about travel nightmares and existential crisis. We've all had them. Dot. A jungle based on Israeli adventurer, author, and humanitarian Yossi Ginsberg's memoir of the same name puts both on display to horrifying effect. This travel diary Jared does to hiking in the Amazon, what Broke Down Palace did to Thailand. In my 14-year-old mind, at least in 1981, much to the disappointment of his parents, Yossi Ginsberg, Daniel Radcliffe, Imperium, embarked on a year-long backpacking trip throughout South America on the shores of Lake Titicaca. Yossi and his new friends A. Marcus, Joel Jackson, Safe Harbor TV series, The Swiss Teacher, and Kevin, Alex Russell, Carrie, the headstrong photographer A, are among a throng of young tourists taken to exploring the area and its local hallucinogenic delights. In an early scene, while lazily mocking at camp, Yossi is spied reading Albert Camus' A Happy Death. It espouses the notion that existentialism emphasizes the existence of the individual person as a free and responsible agent determining their own development, and that agency reflects a condition of existence. A Happy Death, divided into two depressingly titled parts, natural death and conscious death, concerns itself with the act of will to consciously create one's happiness only. It takes time to be happy, a lot of time. Happiness, too, is a long patience. Screenwriter Justin relies on the intertextuality of Cass' narrative to further inform his adaptation of Yossi. For Yossi, a young man with presumably all the time and hubris in the world, happiness means time to escape the well-worn path. So far, his travels, a while by no means ordinary, have not veered far from the path of the classic gapered, outdoorsy types. He is eager to exercise the last human freedom of choosing his own way. Back in Laz, Yossi encounters a mysterious character offering a truly unique expedition into the uncharted Amazon in search of gold, in a remote indigenous village. This trip would represent a real adventure stretching far beyond the guidebooks of the traditional tourist experience. This man's planing guide, Carl Thomas Kretschmann, Avengers Age of Ultron, set off all my own personal alarm bells. But our adventurers are none too concerned and excitedly follow him into the untamed Bolivian jungle. Greg Mlan's filmmaking is as immersive as the Amazonian jungle. The sounds of swarming insects, machetes slicing through brush, rushing rivers, and wildlife drown out most others and create a general feeling of uneasiness to Mlan's credit. The audience intuits that this backpacking trip is not going to end well. Although this being a true story, most know the basic conceit going in. The cinematography mirrors the character's visual and experiential points of view. When Marcus falls behind, he is filmed in disorienting slow motion. When the crew runs a river in a surprisingly well-constructed draft, they are filmed with the shaky cam speed of incoming rapids. These more intimate portrayals are intercut with sweeping long-range shots that show the full scope of the beautiful but dangerous landscape and have the unsettling effect of making Yossi appear small and insignificant in its presence. At one point, while trying to use the river as his guide, Yossi treks in a large circle, ending his day in the same place it began. Escaping the jungle is Sophian task if there ever was one. Jungly is often beautiful, and during many scenes, very difficult to watch, deliberately so. There are multiple scenes lingering on horribly blistered feet, grotesque kills, beating unsavory meals, and one particularly gruesome encounter with a parasite, overlooking the egregious Israeli accent, which is abandoned as quickly as the initial voice overstructure. Radcliffe gives a convincing performance as Yossi, fully inhabiting the physically and emotionally brutal role. By Part 2. Camilla's protagonist successfully pursues happiness by abandoning the Kestai world. I would argue that Yossi and McLean do not subscribe to this theory. The trio of backpackers are happiest when providing medical treatment to the villagers, or playing soccer with the children, or unwittingly giving the local women a show as they bathe in the river. During Yossi's solo journey, he experiences hallucinations, family flashbacks, and even imagines an indigenous travel companion to help guide and protect. In pursuit of happiness, he did not abandon the world. The world abandoned him, and he sought out human connection, a however fabricated and fleeting to keep him going. As someone known to choose her own happiness, and coincidentally, traveling to Bolivia next month. This true story hit a little too close to home. In the years since hanging up his Quidditch broom, a Daniel Radcliffe has blazed the surprisingly adventurous trail, devoting himself to risky projects that stray far from the beaten path, some of them quite literally. For the second time in the last 18 months, the former Harry Potter star has wandered off into the wilderness, following the miraculously inventive Swiss Army man with a true-life survival story about a restless Israeli kid who wound up stranded by himself in an uncharted stretch of the Amazon. And while Jungle glaringly lacks the flair and depth of feeling that define Radcliffe's previous stroll through the great outdoors, it's somehow of a more disgusting than Swiss Army Man, a movie in which the actor plays a corpse whose farts are so explosive that they propel his body across the surface of the ocean like a jet ski. I was desperate to escape the well-worn path. Yossi Ginsberg intones during the film's opening voiceover, the narration giving us a chance to acclimate to Radcliffe's strong but convincing Tel Aviv accent. It's 1981. Ginsberg is 21 years old, and he's happily willing to risk death just for the chance to be different. Spoiler alert, this film is adapted from a memoir that Ginsberger wrote in 2005. We meet him as he arrives in central Bolivia, scruffy and invincible, and eager to prove to us and to himself that he's living his life to the fullest. He's not the only one. Ginsberg hasn't been on the ground 5 minutes when he meets a fellow traveler named Marcus Joel Jackson, a wandering school teacher with the heart of a poet and the soul of a saint. By the end of his first day, our hero is doing psychedelic jungle drugs with the beautiful girl who's sleeping in the next tent over. By the end of his first week, Ginsberg has grown inseparable from Marcus and his friend Kevin, Alex Russell, a dashing American photographer who could easily be mistaken for a young Eric Bonnet. People will never grow tired of movies about hapless white kids wandering off where they don't belong. And MLAN seasons that particular to perfection, maintaining a fine balance between horror and excitement, fear and strength. Justin Monio's script falls apart like dead skin as soon as born. Ginsberg is separated from the group, and the group is separated from each other. But he deserves credit for complicating these characters beyond easy archetypes, just as the actors who play them should be commended for the relative nuance of their performances, each one of them harboring his own measure of self-doubt and suspicion. It's a shame that Jungle doesn't further explore Ginsberg's motivating obsession with weakness, but you get the sense that Ginsberg himself is trying to ignore it, exposing a weakness of a different sort. His unexamined nature only becomes a problem once he starts to starve, prompting a string of hallucinations and flashbacks that expose just how little we care about the kid and how little we care to learn. Madness is difficult to convey on screen, and less is often more. MLAN Ops. Foremost, sacrificing Radcliffe performance. So alert and responsive that you can feel the life draining out of his body once the Amazon takes whole day at the altar of some empty affectations. It's true that Ginsberger really did have visions of a half-naked Inca girl and that he survived by trying to keep her safe, but her importance is lost in a tiresome haze of details as Jungle merely signifies madness instead of inviting us to see it for ourselves. A group of friends join a guide for a trek into the Bolivian jungle, searching for an Indian village. The men soon realize that the jungle is a difficult place to be. Seeing as Daniel Radcliffe, aka the boy wizard Harry Potter, hit a grand slam with his similarly themed but far less reality-grounded performance, seen as Swiss Army Mana, a severely overlooked and underrated film, easily the best of 2016. It's a no-brainer that he was attracted to the script for director Greg McLean's Wolf Creek and his first 2017 film, Atabelco, experiment survivalist biopic Jungle, a genre feature about a tight-knit band of close friends and a shady travel guide exploring uncharted Bolivian territory for pleasure treasure and a hidden Indian tribe. However, heading back to the well of success didn't really pay off, as Rad portraying the real-life Israeli Yossi Ginsburg circa 1981. The movie is also adapted from his memoirs of the experience, titled The Jungle, a harrowing true story of survival, consistently gives an unconvincing performance, namely due to an equally wonky accent. This flop is distractingly noticeable during the first act, few scenes that utilize narrative exposition, which not so surprisingly disappears rather quickly from the film entirely. The setup as a whole to the journey into the unknown is a wobbly affair, quickly thrusting Yossi and the buddies he comes across into a strong brotherhood, never really giving each character depth beyond announcing their occupation or other general tidbits. As a result, there also isn't a believable or rational understanding as to why risking life by trekking into probable dangerous territories is so important. Even the conniving and convincing done by Carla to coerce Yossi into embarking on a wild goose chase with his pals is accomplished weakly with one dialogue exchange. There are poorly placed random flashbacks to Yossi's home life, showcasing his disgruntled parents, annoyed by his thirst for adventure over the tried-and-true blueprint of attending a prestigious college, subsequently earning a financially lucrative and prestigious job. But they don't mean anything or carry any emotional significance. Jungle is succeed by pitting the group up against some devastating forces of nature, whether it be a makeshift riverboat raft or disgustingly painful-looking feet sores on the weakest link of the bunch. Also considering that there is so little character development outside the minor touches here and there for why, the film actually becomes far more enjoyable and intense once he gradually gets separated from the rest of the pack until he is all by his lonesome. This also hides the aforementioned accent issue, allowing Daniel Radcliffe to thrive in the role on a purely physical level. Greg McLean takes this opportunity to really spearhead Yossi through hell and back with some graphically violent but appropriately primal acts of violence toward different species. There's even some always welcome gross-out body horror. Continuing along with that thought, Ajungi seemingly makes it a point to demonstrate just how brutal humanity's instincts become when facing life or death peril. It can't be denied that the film does fall into some cliché dildo copyright traps. Occasionally, there are fairly amateurish hallucination sequences that are obvious to catch. The script is all around shoddy. With that said, filming on location, this grueling tale of the human spirit's resiliency and drive to not perish adds layers of authenticity that propel the flick up a few notches in quality. Unfortunately, there are also some really bad CGI distractions. But for the most part, it feels like we are there with the characters, especially when the focus has settled in on solely Yossi. Appropriate jungle-themed music definitely enhances the atmosphere and is another positive point worthy of mention. However, when the typical post-biopic pre-credits factual notes started appearing on the screen one by one, it was further evidence that this story of remarkable survival deserved more character depth, especially considering a fairly major reveal about the tour guide. It misses the mark in creating palpable brotherhood, in turn sinking many aspects of the narrative. Overall, the script by frequent television writer Justin Mono clearly needed another rewrite, but the direction by Greg McLean is efficient enough to make the film well above watchable and entertaining. Regardless, Ajungli most definitely expands on the meaning of the expression jungle out there. All hail Daniel Radcliffe, unsung hero of independent offbeat cinema. A while ago, there was this curious little think piece in the Grode in which the writer pontificated obtusely upon the state of the great Radcliffe's post-franchise career. This petty idea that since Drad's present star status has not matched the marquee heights of an already pre-sold gargantuan sequence of films based on a million billion selling beloved bunch of children's budgetary and marketing might have one of the largest and most vertically integrated studios in the entire world, then it could only mean that our Daniel must be a cursed dot. I beg to differ. Radcliffe is awesome. Not only has your man sidestepped the heartbreaking off-screen madness that can befall child actors propelled to stardom, but he's done it with such Bach. No tiresome scandals, no ego tripping, just lovely dear ads and his delightfully weird appearances on chat shows and his consistently left-field choice of roles. Here is an actor who went from kids lit to gay beat poetry, Kill Your Darlings, Your Horns to Body Burp Epicus with Army Man. Drad's presence in these films, his geeky handsomeness, his sad vulnerability, is always idiosyncratic. I could write Dreams, for example, about his portrayal of fragile masculinity. In 2012 is A Woman in Black, A Broken Bar, which means it's a real shame that McLean's a jungly isn't up to much. Based on a true story, in the film, Radcliffe plays Yossi, an Israeli rainforest in search of a lost Indian tribe. Yossi is egged on by 3 other travelers who are friends in that peripheral way, which traveling companions are, that is, virtual strangers. It turns out, and after an interminable buildup of pretty locations and the usual tropes of the gap-year travelogue someone reads, came as there's some soft drugs, it all goes, tits up jungly insinuates towards the sort of themst that off the green infino, and it's ill crudely probed the sense that Yosh and his pals are yet more patronizing Westerners, who visit foreign territories with their humble and impoverished people to simply grab it of a self-discovery before jetting on back to their metropolitan privilege to bore their views about it. However, despite Yossi's excitable mention of a wild Indians, this subtext is left alone for the most part, and instead a rather gentle, lost in the jungle narrative emerges. Fans of the peerless a wolf cria, or even the pitiless fun of anti-crocodile propaganda, PC or Rogue, McLean's earlier forays into horror, may well be disappointed by this almost tension-free survival drama. Perhaps because he jungly is a true story, it is clear from the off that dear ads will get out alive and in. Fairness, he's the only one we really care about due to his established persona and recognizable charisma. Another example of Radcliffe using his iconic relevance for good. His very presence here promoting this potentially tough sell. Still, unlike Sia 127 Hours, another true story about an idiot, there is scant suspense here, and instead, odd little sequences like a trippy sex scene and a third act literally as it occurs during rainy season. But dream with, and I'm not making this up, a boing sound effect, which I'm guessing were only included to mediate the potential homoerotic suggestions of 4 young lads at camp and reassure us that Radcliffe's character is not gay. Towards the end, there is some delicious body horror involving mangled feet and a forehead worm to look forward to. But by the time that comes around, you may well feel similarly trapped, like I wondering when, or indeed, if it will all end. The jungle of the title is in Bolivia, and the source of this film is a book by Yossi Ginsberg. As a youngster, Yossi, played here by Daniel Radcliffe, set out in 1981 to seek adventure. So it is appropriate to have Radcliffe play this character, given that in his career post-Harry Potter, he has become an actor who readily invites young audiences to identify with his roles. Although Yossi is the central figure in this true tale, the enterprise that he undertook found him in the company of 2 other young men, the photographer Kevin Gale, Arthur Russell, and the less intrepid Marcus Stam, Joel Jackson. However, the man who caught Yossi's imagination with his tales of a hidden world waiting to be discovered was the older Karl Rupter, Thomas Kretschmann. So it can be said that he was the one who instigated what proved to be a decidedly hazardous trip. Jungli is in essence a film in 2 parts, as the 4 men travel out from La Paz by land and by water into the relative unknown. Their story prompts thoughts of such great film dramas of exploration as those 2 Herzog classics of its Grow and Aguari Wrath of God, but not altogether. Surprisingly, the comparison underlines the fact that as written by Justin Mojo and directed by Greg McLean, A Jungli is strictly junior school stuff. Nor need one go back so far to think of a film that shows this one up when it comes to shooting the rapids. MLen relies so much on editing that it feels far less authentic than The River Wilder, 1994. Those unfamiliar with the titles mentioned may more easily embrace The Jungli. But be that as it may, its second half is not at all sure-footed. This half finds Yossi alone and lost in the jungle, where he survives for longer than anybody would have anticipated. Cinema is not without an occasional dead narrator. But in addition to introducing his own story at the start, Yossi is the author of the book on which this film is based, though there is no suspense as to his ultimate fate. Instead, the film seeks to portray Yossi's desperate state by incorporating hallucinations along with brief flashbacks to his earlier days and bizarre fantasy images accompanied by pop song or even by hand music for the royal fireworks. Just how bathed this becomes is all the clearer because this section brings to mind one of Radcliffe's most adventurous recent choices, 2016's Swiss Army Man. Despite his good efforts, A Jungly seems feeble by comparison, although some viewers prepared to settle for a more conventional and less truly imaginative work may find themselves engaged by A Jungle. But if the film has any claim to fame, it probably lies in the fact that it is a co-production between Australia, the UK, and Colombia. Daniel Radcliffe stars as Yossi Ginsberg, an Israeli tourist traveling through Bolivia in 1981, who comes across a charismatic adventurer named Carl Thomas Kretschmann, who has a wild story about secret indigenous tribes in gold by pocketful deep inside jungle. Naturally, only Carl knows where it is. And since Yossi apparently lost track of that nice businessman who offered to sell him the Brooklyn Bridge, he jumps into this opportunity with both feet and convinces his new friends, Kevin, Alex Russell, and Marcus Joel Jackson, to join him. The dramatic hook of Jungle is that eventually Yossi finds himself alone in the jungle, lost and dying with little hope of survival. But the operative word here is eventually. Jungle takes over an hour to get to the meat of the movie, which could have provided director Greg McLean and screenwriter Justin Monjo ample opportunity to build suspense by developing their characters and giving them interesting things to say and do. Together. The filmmakers chose instead to take the other route, systematically walking us through the events that led to Yossi's predicament, even when they're not particularly interesting. The plot points that drive our group of explorers to split up are so straightforward, even benign, that it feels like we're watching someone's grumpy vacation slideshow and not a harrowing drama about near-death experiences. Foot pain may, in this case, have led to a tragedy, but it doesn't exactly sound like a selling point in print, and it doesn't come across much better on camera. Greg McLean's direction perks up once Yossi gets stranded, and the movie gets exponentially better very quickly. It eager to stretch outside the confines of the scary movie genre with a more adventuresome film like Jungle. And some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.